Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into some incredibly fascinating, albeit pretty dense, source documents that lay out a completely alternative jurisdictional framework. The overarching goal and the exact title of our explainer today is just as the sources frame it: navigating the modern world through self-governance. We're going to keep a strictly impartial, documentary-style lens here as we explore this really complex theory on how individuals supposedly interact with modern institutions.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at self-governance today, dive into understanding political status, unpack jurisdiction, look at responsibilities in modern society, education and public service, and finally, planning for future generations. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Self-governance today and the philosophy of autonomy.
So the source materials kick things off by diagnosing what they see as a massive primary problem. They claim that people are unknowingly living under this, phony military occupation of endless statutes that just completely drain our resources. And the proposed solution? Reclaiming your autonomy through active responsibility. The author actually uses a really great analogy here. They say, having the right to pick blueberries on a neighbor's farm doesn't actually mean much if you don't physically hike up the hill and do the hard work to pick them yourself. You have to put in the effort.
Now, this framework strongly argues that true self-governance literally demands dissolving those oppressive political bonds. To quote the text directly, the only actual and proper job of government is to protect people and their property. So what does this actually mean for us? Well, it means a massive shift in expectations. It means individuals have to step up and accept the responsibility of protecting their own communities, rather than just sitting back and expecting a corporate government to do it for them.
All right, moving on to Section 2, understanding political status and reclaiming identity. So how exactly does this text classify civic allegiance? Well, the documents make a pretty bold claim that most Americans have been completely misidentified through their birth registrations. They actually lay out 4 distinct political statuses. First up, you have state nationals. These are described as private, living people of the soil who owe absolutely no obligation to the government. Then you have state citizens, who are folks that voluntarily take up public office. But then, in stark contrast, the text defines U.S. citizens as British territorial subjects and municipal citizens as subjects bound to corporate debt. It's a wildly different way of looking at identity.
Take a look at the macro-level distinction being made right here. On one side, we've got the Union of States, and this is specifically designated for those state nationals we just talked about, operating entirely as private persons within soil jurisdiction. On the other side, though, is the Federation of States. This is for state citizens, the ones who actively step into international land and sea jurisdictions to manage actual state governance. It's all about where you stand, literally and legally.
So you might be wondering, how does a person practically return from the so-called sea back to the land and soil? Well, the author outlines a very strict step-by-step path to correct your public records. First off, you got to be at least 21 years old. Second, you need to be born on American soil or at least prove 7 years of residency. But the most crucial step? You have to fundamentally change your own assumptions about obedience to statutory authorities before you can even formalize this expatriation. It's just as much a mental shift as a legal one.
Which brings us to Section 3, understanding jurisdiction, specifically land versus sea. Now, this right here is the underlying structural mechanism of the entire theory. It's a strict bifurcation of systems, basically splitting the legal world in two. On one side, you have the land and soil jurisdiction. This is where living people operate under American common law. But on the flip side, you have territorial or municipal jurisdiction. This operates under the law of the sea, statutory law, and what the text refers to as corporate legal fictions. The absolute core claim of these documents is that individuals can theoretically just opt out of statutory jurisdiction altogether by legally standing on the land. But historically speaking, how did this massive jurisdictional split even happen? The whole framework hinges on a really fascinating historical claim from the source text that there isn't actually just one constitution, but 3 entirely distinct constitutions that act as separate power-sharing debt agreements. Let's break that down.
Here is exactly how the text explains it. They claim the 1787 Constitution was strictly delegated for international trade and commerce. Then, the 1789 Constitution gave rise to a territorial branch, which they say was managed by the British. And finally, the 1790 Constitution created a municipal branch, allegedly managed by the Holy Roman Empire. The documents assert that each of these created a completely separate branch of federal subcontracting. Pretty wild, right?
All right, Section 4, Responsibilities in Modern Society and Lawful Conduct.
So, when you are actually out there interacting with administrative entities today, the text relies super heavily on this one specific legal maxim. Notice to principals is notice to agents. Notice to agents is notice to principals. You will see this phrasing used repeatedly. It acts as a formal public notice to basically compel performance and firmly enforce jurisdictional boundaries against alleged corporate agents, judges, and governors. It's a way of drawing a very clear line in the sand.
See, in this specific commercial framework, truth is absolutely sovereign. You can't just go around making baseless claims. You have to follow some very strict procedures. We're talking about filing rebuttal affidavits of truth, providing point-by-point material evidence, and even accepting full commercial and perjury liability. So it's an incredibly rigorous system that demands sworn testimony to push back against what they perceive as corporate overreach.
And a huge component of this whole process is the State of the Union indemnity bond. You can think of it kind of like a required financial safeguard. Basically, to lawfully transact in commerce while under this newly corrected political status, individuals are required to issue these specific bonds to the Treasury. And doing this by the book, well, it requires an indemnity and 2 guarantors who have also fully corrected their own public records. It's like a giant puzzle of accountability.
Moving forward, we've got Section 5, Education and Public Service.
So, if you want to apply this theory to broader society, it requires actually building local community structures. Specifically, they call for forming state jural assemblies. Their duties include filling common law jury pools and electing land jurisdiction sheriffs and justices. According to the documents, these operate strictly as people courts. They're meant to handle things like private property and probate, and they sit entirely outside of the standard corporate legal system.
The sources draw a really sharp contrast here between lawful jural assemblies and statutory jural societies. See, assemblies operate on common law, and they have their justices confirmed rather than sworn in. On the flip side, the documents claim that jural societies, which run our standard modern courts, well, they operate on the law of the sea. They deal in legal fictions and utilize commercial codes with pagan ancient origins. It's a night and day difference in this framework.
And finally, Section 6, Future Generations, and our summary.
Okay, here is the grand, macro-level roadmap the author provides for effectively replacing the current administrative state. It's a huge undertaking. It requires a critical mass of people first reclaiming their birthright status, then forming those state journal assemblies, filling local court offices, holding assembly sessions, and eventually rechartering the federal states to convene a true continental Congress. It is a total, systemic overhaul built entirely from the ground up.
But of course, any structural change relies entirely on culture. The source material emphasizes that true self-governance starts at home. It involves governing families and actively teaching children their heritage so that future generations aren't, as they say, pillaged. As the text beautifully puts it, we become by doing, we learn by teaching, we become empowered to protect each other. It completely reframes civic obedience. It's not about following orders from above, it's about voluntarily taking up the heavy burden of local responsibility. And that wraps up our neutral overview of these incredibly complex alternative jurisdictional theories. So we're going to leave you with this final provocative thought straight from the implications of the source material. According to this framework, will you step up and do the hard work of accepting the burden of self-governance, or will you choose to remain under the familiar comfort of a predetermined statutory state? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer today, and as always, keep learning.